Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life, a podcast about soundtracks, music, and movies. Each episode features a guest and focuses on a specific soundtrack and the personal stories connected to it. Now here's your host, Ryan Pack.
Welcome to Soundtrack Your Life. I'm Ryan Peck, and this is a podcast where I interview a guest about a soundtrack that they have a personal connection to. Today, I'm talking to fellow film podcaster Raymond Luu of the Real Asian Podcast, which you can find on all major podcast platforms. Real is spelled R-E-E-L. So, Raymond, why don't you tell us about Real Asian Podcast?
Hey, what's up, Ryan? Nice to be on the show. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we're going to talk about, and I'll let you do the intro. But Real Asian Podcast, as you mentioned, we're a film deep dive analysis discussion podcast, and really what we do is we take Asian or Asian American film, put it at the center table, and myself and other co-hosts or sometimes a guest will take it apart, peel out of it what we found important to the movie, themes of it, characters, but then also in the kind of greater Asian and Asian American culture. Like, how did this impact the society at large? Is there any news about it? Why is it the talk of the town? So that's pretty much the format and the structure of the show. We try to give a nice feel that it's just a bunch of friends kind of hanging out in the bar, and we've just seen a pretty great movie, and we just want to talk about it.
Very cool. Yeah, I enjoy your podcast. I think you guys have some really great takes. A lot of stuff that I wouldn't pick out myself.
Nice. Yeah, what's great is I give my co-hosts pretty full rein in terms of what they want to talk about. In terms of the planning process, we do start like a doc, and we just say like, hey, what do you guys want to talk about? And we just put down bullet points, and then each co-host kind of comes in with their analysis. And what's great of having different perspectives on it is exactly that. I mean, you get different takes, and I learn stuff from my co-hosts all the time in every episode. Sometimes we agree on things, and sometimes we don't agree on things, but generally we do. So far, we haven't had any heated debates yet, or heated discussions. But who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So for this episode, we'll be talking about the 2018 Ryan Coogler film Black Panther. Raymond, why are we talking about Black Panther today?
Well, I mean, Black Panther was such a milestone in whatever category that you put it, superhero movie, representation, Marvel story, the deep philosophical themes that the movie talks about. Ryan Coogler is a Oakland product, and I'm from the Bay Area, so there's that tie to it too. And I'm a big Marvel fan, so there are so many reasons why I love the Black Panther movie. Just objectively, it was a great film. But like the cherry on top, if anything, it's more than a cherry. It's like that. It's like the perfect cream filling on top of this cake of achievement is the soundtrack put together and curated by Kendrick Lamar. And the soundtrack actually came out before the movie, and it was already kind of getting a lot of buzz. And so when I listened to the soundtrack, I was like, oh my gosh, this is an amazing album. Like, I hadn't even seen the movie, and I already felt like the movie was good. That's how great the album was, or the soundtrack.
Yeah, I agree. I had the same reaction to the soundtrack. I'm a big Kendrick Lamar fan, a big fan of, a lot of the Top Dog Entertainment roster, which is on this soundtrack.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like this really, I don't know if I want to call it a fun album, but it's an album that works as a whole, right? Like, you can listen to it front to back. And so, just like you, I was excited about the movie, but the soundtrack came out first, and I just thought it was a great piece of music without even seeing the film.
Yeah, and that's really hard to do, right? I think when an artist or a producer is tasked with putting together a soundtrack, most of the time it's what the studio kind of assigns it. But what Marvel and the Black Panther team, basically Marvel gave Ryan Coogler an idea. It's like, well, here's full freedom to kind of come up with the soundtrack. And Ryan Coogler talks about how he met Kendrick before, and they've always wanted to work together, but couldn't find a reason to. And then this kind of fell into their lap. And it's really, like as you said, it's really rare that a soundtrack can really stand alone as its own album. And the fact that it's just this collection of artists and styles just perfectly complement each other, right? Usually, in my experience, in most soundtracks, it just kind of captures the mood of the movie, which this album does, but it's kind of like a bonus, or it's kind of like an add-on, or it's like the score. Obviously, if it's a musical movie, that's kind of like a no-brainer. But in this one, it really just perfectly complements and supplements and just adds on to how great the movie is and in how great the album is. It's like a complete package.
Yeah, and I think I read an interview with Ryan Coogler where initially he was just going to ask Kendrick to contribute like a couple of songs.
Yeah,
And then Kendrick watched a cut of the movie, and then he was like, "I've got a whole album of ideas."
Yeah. That's really so funny how like they're like, okay, cool, we'll do a couple of songs, and then after watching an early cut, he's like, no, we got to do the whole thing. Like I think they just ran with it, and again, it I think it was just like a combination of chance and talent and collaboration where Coogler was just like, go for it.
Yeah, so I really enjoy this album, and it's gonna make me kind of sound like a Kendrick hater, but I feel like it's like a Kendrick party album that he like can't make as a solo artist.
Interesting.
Because his solo albums are like so introspective, and they're so. I don't want to say they're not fun, but he kind of picks a storyline for each album, right?
Right. No, and that's fair. I mean, honestly, I think he says himself that it was ideal for a project like this, for him to do a project or get an opportunity to do a project that is not his. And so maybe that kind of gave him the creative freedom to just try things out, showcase his artists. A lot of the artists on the album are from TDE. So he was like, hey, let's just kind of use this opportunity to put together a whole party. And one of the, I guess, criticisms, so I wouldn't call you a Kendrick hater, but definitely one of the criticisms of that, I forget, I think it was one of the newspapers was saying like, oh, this is not Kendrick's style. And, they said generic, which is, I think it's a very harsh mischaracterization of the album, but they're like, oh, it's a generic off-brand of what we're used to of Kendrick. And I was like, that's a little harsh, and he took the opportunity to like really put something together that's new.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I feel like it's a celebration of blackness, especially on the second half of the album where they bring in like some South African musicians. I get a really celebratory tone from this album, which, like I said, I'm not trying to hate, but like sometimes you don't get that from his album because he's, talking about like suffering or, the plight of growing up in Compton, like there's not a lot of room for celebration on some of those projects. And I was on someone else's podcast and they were talking about the song King's Dead. And they're like, I can't believe that there's a Kendrick song where they just have Future saying la-di-da-di-da slob on my knob.
Yeah, I have that down as one of my notable tracks. I would say it's probably in the bottom part of my tracks, only because I'm not a Future hater, but I don't listen to his stuff. And I laughed. I kind of chuckled at that part when he's like, oh, and that's just Future's style. He's an artist in his own right. But yeah, you're right. I mean, for Kendrick to put to be the person behind it and to curate it, he had to have some kind of sign off. But kind of along that same line, when I was doing the research on Paramedic, which was performed by SOB/RBE, there was an interview where, they were being asked like, how did you guys even get on this album? And they were an up and coming Bay Area rap group at the time. And they came in about to record, and Kendrick was just like, you guys do you, like do your own sound, like just rap your own bars, don't worry about what is expected of you. Because if you listen to the rest of their music, it's considered kerosene bar, like it's just fire, and it's so real and raw. I actually I like listening to SOBRB. I actually think they broke up though, but their style is wouldn't say Disney appropriate, but Kendrick was like, do you know? And I think that just to his credit of allowing these artists work.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite songs on the record. And I didn't know who they were beforehand, but they don't seem intimidated to be on the same soundtrack as Kendrick and Schoolboy Q and all of these bigger names. Like they're not intimidated at all.
No, that's great. Also on that interview, one of them was just like, after they recorded it, the interview was like, did you think that the song would be so, I think the song went platinum. And they're like, no. As soon as they stopped recording and left the studio, they thought that's not going on the album. Like immediately they were like, it's not going out. They thought it was just Kendrick going to record just to gas him up, but then they didn't think he would actually make it to the final cut, you know?
Yeah, and I think Ryan Coogler was a big fan of theirs as well. Like, I think he told Kendrick, like, hey, check these guys out. Like, they should be on the soundtrack.
Yeah, and, again, Coogler from the Bay Area, SOBRB from the Bay Area, so there's that Bay Area connect, and I like it. It does bring it's a unique style to the album I think it's perfect because Oakland is featured in the movie. And so you have to have that Oakland flavor. And so I think every song on the soundtrack was intentional and has some kind of tie to the movie itself.
Yeah. I remember the first couple songs that were released from the soundtrack were like the SZA song and the Weeknd song. Yeah. And those are definitely like two of the more popular songs on the album.
Right. They live with that. I think those singles came out a couple weeks before leading up to it. And yeah, those are you have to have like the pop songs that, that's going to be played on the radio, that everyone's going to know. But, All the Stars with SZA was Grammy nominated. It's an amazing song. And that was probably a song that was listened to constantly, and every like top 100 playlist that you can think of. Such a popular song.
Yeah, and I think I remember reading like a criticism of that song, like, oh, it's, basically created just to be played during the end credits of a film. And it's like, yeah, that's the point of the song. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, it's a great, like, soaring pop song that you put at the end of the movie. Kendrick has an ear for that. I think he did that on Good Kid, Mad City it's the one that Just Blaze produces at the end.
Yeah.
I think I remember reading an interview with Kendrick, and they're like, "Doesn't it feel kind of out of place to put that song at the end of the album?" And he's like, "It's the end credit song for my album."
Yeah, like no, it's the literal song that's in the movie and in the album. And I don't know, did you get a chance to see the music video by chance, or watch the music video for All the Stars?
Yes.
Yeah. What'd you think of it?
I'm trying to remember it because like I'm getting it mixed up with the actual end credits of the movie, which also seems like a music video.
Yeah.
Let me do a quick Google just to see like what the image of the video is, and I'll get back to you.
I think if I remember the thumbnail being like Kendrick's on a wooden boat or a canoe, and he's riding on top of these hands or these waves. And then kind of throughout the music video, and I know I'm describing it when you're going to watch it, but he's in modernized like Afro futuristic garb, singing with SZA, and SZA's kind of like dancing around and singing with her chorus with stars all around her. And obviously there's a whole bunch of constellations in the video and stuff like that, but it was beautiful. I mean, it definitely had meaningful interpretation to it. You think about the ancestral plane in Black Panther and the stars and all that stuff. So there's that connected to it, and it definitely had a lot of meaning to it. There's a part in one of the verses, I think it's Kendrick's verse, where he kind of acts as Killmonger. He kind of jumps into perspective of Killmonger, and we get a sense of like how love is defined and their expectations and confrontation, all these things. And so I just thought it was great.
I remember watching the movie for the first time, and we saw it in like in an enhanced theater for sound.
IMAX?
It wasn't like It wasn't. No, it was just sound. So it wasn't a bigger screen, but it was.
Yeah.
I think they called it AMC Prime.
Interesting.
So it was like a step above the Dolby surround sound.
Is it just like really in there? I don't know. I guess it's just really loud.
This movie, like with, it's very drum forward with the score.
Yeah.
Like, so it was like super intense. Like it really enhanced the viewing of the movie. And it enhanced a lot of the songs too. So All the Stars, the first time I heard it, I was like, oh, it's a good catchy song. When I was watching the end credits that first time I saw the movie in this, enhanced sound theater, like, like everything I was like, how do I get this speaker system in my house? And it made me appreciate the song a lot more.
Yeah. And you just really got the full blast of it. In the movie itself, when I was watching the movie again, I don't think there are notes and different like beats and sounds that are pulled from the soundtrack, but actually not that much. I think the only other than All the Stars in the end credits, I think the only other direct song from soundtrack in the movie was Ops, which was, I think, played during the car chase scene in Korea. I gotta imagine, now that you mentioned that, having that sound system, because that car scene in itself was absolutely just high adrenaline, fast paced, beautifully shot. I love that car scene. And if you're sitting in a theater with that sound system going off, you had to be, your blood must have been pumping right there.
Oh yeah, that scene was amazing. Big Vince. I'm a big Vince Staples fan, anyways.
Yeah,
but to hear Ops with like the enhanced sound, oh, it was so
and the
good.
Visuals, yeah. If you don't mind, I would love to talk about the movie. But what your general takeaways in terms of Black Panther, or maybe actually start off with just how big of a Marvel fan you are, if you are.
Yeah, I'm a Marvel fan. I've seen all the phase 1, 2, and 3 movies. So I got through Endgame. I'd seen all the films. We are up to date on WandaVision.
Oh, I mean, no, we don't want to spoil anything, but God, that show is amazing.
I would love to talk about a lot of the songs they picked for that show. That would be a good podcast.
Yeah.
So I was really looking forward to Black Panther. It met all my expectations. I was really excited to see it I paid extra to see it in the fancy theater.
Yeah, that's true. You went with the AMC Prime.
Yeah, and it was worth every penny. I saw it again later with my parents in just a regular theater, and like I was so disappointed with how like the sound was just not popping all over the place.
Oh, you were spoiled. You're like, oh man.
So the movie was nominated for Film of the Year by the Oscars. Didn't win, but it was the first Marvel film to be nominated for that. And I had a discussion with some friends about, like, why are they nominating Black Panther for this? And my response was, the Academy loves these like epic sort of battle movies. It's kind of like Marvel's version of Braveheart. Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah. And it did an amazing. It had an amazing performance at the box office too. And, I think not to ignore the fact that it was kind of during this time where representation, we're kind of coming off of #Oscars so white, and, the societal impact that the movie had, on top of it being a really good, robust movie. If you think about the themes that are in the movie, and that's really why I loved it so much. I especially love Michael B. Jordan's character, Eric Killmonger. His character was so complex, and I love movies where you somewhat understand the villain. Like, those are my favorite type of like, other than the art housey kind of, slice of life kind of movies. But when you have those big blockbuster movies that's like good versus evil kind of thing, well, the best ones are, for me, it's like evil is like only evil because they have a certain perspective, and maybe they just kind of take it a little bit too far, or they, maybe their approach of doing it is wrong. But you're like, I kind of get what they're saying. I kind of get what Eric Killmonger is saying,
Right. That's why my friend says Magneto is like the most famous Marvel villain because he has a backstory where you kind of understand why he thinks the way he does.
Yeah. And like Thanos too, even with Thanos, it's like, he's mad, but when he explains himself, you're like, okay, resources are limited, like, I don't know about wiping half of the universe out, but okay, you have a point there, Thanos.
Like, you think you're doing good. Like, you think you're helping.
Yeah, no, honestly. And the biggest theme, along that line with having the villain kind of explore and bring up and pose this question to the audience. And it just got me really thinking. And what was beautiful is that it is really what Ryan Coogler wanted to convey in the movie. He was all about kind of like, there's this group of people that were forcibly taken from their homeland, their motherland, and from Africa, their mother continent, and forced to live in this other country under the worst conditions possible. And then you kind of pose it to where you have this isolated country in Wakanda who's got the best technology and the best resources in the world, and it's just completely thriving. And then you have, the Njobu, I believe, is Sterling K. Brown's character, realizing that it's not the same, and is it Wakanda's responsibility to have to open up their borders, essentially, to change their foreign policy, to start helping other people? And at first it's kind of like, no, because you could say, well, that's why they're thriving, is because they don't share with other people. They're participating in isolationism. But obviously T'Challa changes all that. And can we just say rest in peace to Chadwick Boseman? Oh man.
Yeah, he does a stellar job in that role.
Seriously, I'm bummed that we're not going to see more of him. Just an artist in the truest form, the way that he went out. And I know that he also was in The Five Bloods, and he was also in another critically acclaimed film. But in just this context of not being able to see him take on the Black Panther mantle really saddens me. But it's also, I know that I don't know if this is true, but I heard that Shuri is most likely to take up the Black Panther mantle for Black Panther 2. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least it's in the comics where Shuri also becomes Black Panther. So that's probably the most likely option.
Yeah. It's sad, but I mean, now we have him memorialized and celebrated in this work. So I'm happy for that. I mean, he was amazing. And so much of his work is just absolutely phenomenal.
There was a joke that they kind of revived after he passed away where, for a while he was getting every major historical Black role. So he was James Brown, he was Jackie Robinson.
Right.
Obviously he became Black Panther. So there was a bunch of comedians who were like, I guess other Black people can get like cool roles now that Chadwick is gone. but as a like, not to say like they're glad Chadwick is gone, but like,
right.
He was like the A-lister who was scooping up like every great role because he was so great.
Yeah, he was so great at playing civil rights leaders and important Black figures. And that's a hard talent. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. I remember watching this interview. I think it was Jamie Foxx who was asking him, like, why do you pick these roles and what does that really mean? Because even though these people are real people, as an actor, it's even harder for that to portray a real person because, one, you want to do it justice. You don't want to completely, botch the portrayal of this character. But two, you don't want to do it exactly like them, where you're kind of, you have to have some kind of interpretation of it. And so for him as an actor to be known to be so prolific in that space is a rare achievement in and of itself. I mean, and obviously it just shows his acting chops. And oh, by the way, he's King T'Challa,
Right. Yeah, I don't think I realized how great of an actor he was until I started like putting the performances next to each other, and then like hearing how he talks in real life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like
So,
he's from Carolina, right? So he has a little bit of that like Carolina drawl, and to
yeah,
go from
yeah,
that to talking like T'Challa,
yeah.
you know, like that, it's hard to keep that going for like a whole movie or a
It,
movie and a half, you know, because he was in
oh,
Civil War as well.
yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. And Infinity War too. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it just shows how cerebral he was with his work, and being able to just carry that on. Just amazing performance. With the movie, I did want to. One of the tidbits that I did find that Ava DuVernay was supposed to direct it, I guess, before Coogler was considered, and then
Mhm.
F. Gary Gray were supposed to were in consideration to direct Black Panther. I think years ago too, but then I think Ava said her vision didn't quite match with what was thought of Black Panther, so ultimately went with Coogler. And to tie it back with the soundtrack, because of the relationship that Ryan Coogler had with Kendrick, I honestly believe that if Coogler was not the director for this movie, we would not get the Black Panther soundtrack that we have today. Who knows how that would have turned out.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
I actually met Winston Duke once.
Oh yeah, when did you meet
Yeah.
him?
So I work at a nonprofit. It's called Project by Project, and this was 2018 actually. So, um, we have an LA chapter, so we throw this annual gala every year. It's like this big food tasting benefits when events were allowed. Seems like a different world now, but we had this gala, and I was at the LA one helping out, and I remember it's primarily for like Asian people, but obviously anyone and whoever buys a ticket can go. And it's in LA, so typically we do get these like actors and celebrities from that go to the LA one. SF, we always get like the tech entrepreneurs. It's kind of funny that it reflects the city. But anyways, this guest comes in. She's VIP and she has a plus one, and she's like introducing everyone. And then he was so cool, like so gracious, and he like introduced himself to everyone too, because I was kind of at the registration table. And I looked at him and I was like, why do you look so familiar? Because he's huge too. He's a tall guy, he's a big guy. And I was like, why does he look so familiar? And it wasn't until he left, and then everyone was kind of following him. So I was like, okay, he's obviously famous. And then someone said like, "Oh, that's M'Baku," and I was like, "Oh man!" I was like, "Oh, that's M'Baku." And I was like, "Oh, this Winston Duke, super nice guy. He was so supportive, and like the nonprofit, the gala, what it was for is for like fundraising for to help other Asian communities, and so for him to kind of show up to an event like that just says a lot about his character, and he was so nice to everyone. So it was pretty interesting.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
so cool, and he's one of my favorite characters in the movie. I mean,
yeah,
the whole
yeah,
ensemble is pretty amazing.
yeah, definitely. I love Okoye, Nakia, and Shuri. I love how there's even a song that's kind of dedicated to the strong female presence that's in the movie. And I caught that with, I think that's The Ways with Khalid and Sway Lee. I actually really like that song too. That was one of my early favorite songs when I listened to it.
Yeah, I was like, I really like that song, and I wouldn't consider myself a Khalid fan.
Mm. Really? How come? Just not
Just
his.
never really got into him, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's very mellow, I would say. I guess his. Yeah, he does have. He has that one song with Disclosure that's really really catchy and poppy. I actually went to one of his shows. Not a bad live artist, I would say. Not a bad live artist, but the lyric that I wanted to pick out is pick me up when I fall down and out, dust me off and show me all the truth. Show me that I'll never fly alone. And I just love that lyric, and just kind of like the ode to powerful women in our lives, who are the true backbones of our society. And, for sure, this song speaks to the Dora Milaje, Um, I think it's a super lovely song. I think that was written by Kendrick and Sway Lee themselves.
Oh, very cool. I'm trying to get like more familiar with like who actually worked on the songs. Like, we're in the age of streaming and like iTunes and stuff. Well, not even iTunes anymore, but we're in the I'm used to having like a CD booklet or a record booklet where like I'm looking at all the producers and I'm looking at all the writers on songs, and like I kind of skipped that until we started talking about doing this episode. Like I've listened to the soundtrack like 100,000 times, but I was never like, oh, who produced this song?
Yeah. Wow. Just even mentioning CD booklets like that, it was so crazy how that used to be a thing. And you would open it and look at it, and sometimes it would have the lyrics, sometimes it would not, and you would just it would just have random like pictures on the booklet. I guess I never really paid too much attention to the booklet when I listened to CDs back then. I definitely enjoyed the back of it because I always look at the track listing, obviously, but just the artwork that was on it. But I mean, yeah, none of that that doesn't exist anymore. No one listens to CDs.
Yeah, I was like, oh, on the Georgia Smith, is that what her name is?
Jorah Smith, yeah.
Jorah Smith. No, sorry, it's On the Ways. The I guess Bad Not Good, that hip hop instrumental band. They're on that song.
Yeah.
And I was like, I would have never even thought about that.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Jorah Smith. I'm a big fan of R&B, so I usually like to try to keep up with like the current R&B artist, and Khalid is someone that's kind of up there, and he's more in the R&B pop, and Jorah Smith, obviously SZA is great, and to see those artists on this album, because I think at the time they're not like huge artists, right? And for Kendrick to be able to be very cognizant of putting these artists based on the fact that it was to a vision, not necessarily to like a marketability, because I'm sure he could have. I think if he asked a whole bunch of artists, like, "Hey, do you want to be on the Black Panther soundtrack?" Everyone's gonna raise their hand because they know, like, cha-ching, Disney, Marvel. That's like a whole train. But he was like, "No, like I have a very specific vision to the soundtrack, and I want to keep it like this."
Yeah, and I think a lot of the smaller artists are the ones that shine. Like, probably my least favorite songs are probably the Travis Scott song. The Weeknd song is fine, but I think there's more interesting songs on the soundtrack.
I'm trying to see where my least favorite song is.
But like I like the Mozzie song on there, and I wasn't too familiar with his work. He's another Bay Area rapper.
Yeah. That one is Seasons. Actually, that one's a pretty good song too, because it's got the Zulu verses on it by Sava, which is a South African rapper, and he's great. Got that reggae vibes to it too. So it was just funny. I remember listening to this album when I was stuck in traffic. I had no choice to be really in tune with the album, and I was like, man, this is track for track just really dope. And it was on repeat for probably for the rest of the year, you know what? King's Dead, I usually skip that song. I know that's critically acclaimed too, but I usually kind of skip it.
Wasn't that nominated for like Song of the Year, Record of the Year at the Grammys?
Yeah. I think at the Grammys it won Best Rap Duo. So it won an award, so, but I'm like, I'll skip over it.
I only like the second half where the beat switches and then Kendrick starts like rapping like red light, green light. And then, the beat drops out and he yells, "I am King Killmonger."
Yeah.
Like I like that half of the song.
that one's good too. I mean, Paramedic, that song just gets me hyped anytime, any day. That was at a lot of house parties. Redemption, what do you think about that song with Zakari? That's got South African vibes to it too.
Oh, it's very pretty.
Yeah.
I like that song.
That song is I looked at the lyrics, straightforward. It's upbeat. The rhythmic beats, great. It's just a party song. Literally, it's about dancing all night. So I was just like, I can get with the song, and I think that's just like to catch that the nightclub kind of feel of just kind of going.
Right. I'm a big fan of the Schoolboy Q song on the soundtrack.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a good get you hype song.
Get your hype song. 2 Chainz, pretty solid track right there. It does cover all the bases. Kind of what you talked about, how like it's almost a little anti-Kendrick in a way, where it's so, when his work is usually introspective, and that's a very observant take. I like how I think it also touches upon how, because the Black Panther movie, when the origins of the characters kind of was created back in like the 60s, 70s, I think. And the movie didn't take place during that time. It took place modern day. That's how Kendrick probably interpreted seeing that first cut of the film, to say, let's bring the sound, to the contemporary sense and modernize it to the sounds of like today's hip hop, while incorporating African themes and African sounds. And I love how his longtime collaborator Ludwig Göransson, who worked with him on Fruitvale and Creed, and they spent time in Africa and just did a whole bunch of research. And also same thing with Soundwave, who was the main producer of the album as well.
Yeah, and I think Ludwig was very cautious about not trying to just co-opt a sound. He wanted to make something authentic. He wanted to really work with African musicians. He wasn't just trying to crib a couple of notes and throwing that into the score. Like, he was very serious about, being respectful of the music that he was trying to make.
Well, it's great. There's this tidbit that I found, that Ludwig took himself to Africa for research, and he thought, since Wakanda was never colonized, he had to research music that was never influenced by Christianity. So he had to like go straight to the source, right? Because if you think about colonization, yeah, the arts got colonized too, in a sense. So he had to go deep into the heart and just pick up out like true, authentic African cultural music, and he incorporated it in the score. So it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I know this isn't soundtrack related, but as far as like how they talk in the movie and kind of the dialect that they use, like all of that was like a lot of research and a lot of discussion.
Yeah,
like it seems like every element, very intentional. Like everything was researched, and like even even when Martin Freeman is like piloting like that virtual kind of jet at the end of the movie, like his AI is Trevor Noah.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I gotta go back and listen to that now. That's pretty cool. That's like his one Marvel contribution.
It's like a kind of a cute cameo, but I remember like reading an interview with Trevor Noah about it, and he was just like so proud of Ryan Coogler's like attention to detail, like how they talk. He's like, like that's like a South African dialect, and like I can tell that like he did the research, and it's just such an honor to see people talking like the people you grew up with, or like you can tell like where it's coming from.
Yeah, it's great. I think Coogler has such a monumental responsibility to ensure that he's telling this Black Panther story not just from his own experience growing up as a kid in the Bay Area, but understanding the roots of his history. And you can really tell that in just almost every minute detail. And obviously the symbolism and importance of Black Panther, and then Oakland ties there. So there's so many like layers and connections to this that I think it was I feel like he probably just saw it as like a complete treat. He was like, I am happy to take on this project. And he just like knocked it out of the water. And I've been even before Black Panther, I've seen Fruitvale Station, I've seen Creed. And so I've always been a Ryan Coogler fan. He's just a fantastic director. Can we also talk about I love Andy Serkis. And he's an amazing actor, and his range is just incredible, you know.
His villain is a lot less complicated than Michael B. Jordan's villain.
Yeah. But every time I see him, though, I just think of Gollum, honestly.
Right. Gollum and the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah. Seriously. But his maniacal like personality in Black Panther was just a great performance to watch. Yeah, he was amazing.
Yeah, I also appreciate that even though his character doesn't have a ton of depth, he plays an important part of the plot, like Michael B. Jordan turning on him and bringing him back to Wakanda, buys him cred with Daniel Kaluuya's tribe, right?
Yeah.
And so I like it wasn't just like he's like this henchman. He was hated in Wakanda, and Michael B. Jordan used that to his advantage.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and obviously he showed up in Age of Ultron. I'm curious, I'm thinking about how soundtracks, artist-driven soundtracks, hard to come by, hard to do well. What are some top of mind artist-driven soundtracks that you can think of that stand out to you that are just like, oh yeah, that was a solid soundtrack?
It's a very different movie, but I think Magnolia is mostly a Amy Mann driven soundtrack. And they even incorporate her CDs into a couple scenes where this girl's doing cocaine off of Amy Mann CD covers.
Nice. I know you did an episode on this. It was Romeo and Juliet soundtrack.
Yeah, so I think that's the big one from the 90s that everyone points to, where you had a bunch of bands writing songs for the soundtrack. So yeah, it's a great curation of music, even though it's not like a specific artist that drives it. It's a great soundtrack, and it's missing the end credits song, which is a Radiohead song, which Radiohead decided to keep for themselves.
I know. Don't you hate it when you try to look up a soundtrack and then only some songs are available because it also has to go through like the artist or sometimes like the ownership of the record label? I'm like, oh man, I wanted to listen to the soundtrack for this song and it's not available.
Well, I think Radiohead, after they recorded it, they were like, oh, we like this too much. We're going to put it on our album. You can't have it for the soundtrack. And then tongue in cheek, they called the song Exit Music for a Film.
Oh man, such a judo move right there.
But yeah, they watched the movie and then they wrote the song for it. And then they're like, oh, this is really good. So you can use it in the movie, but you can't put it on the soundtrack.
Yeah, we want
we'll give you something
full rights to it. Yeah, we want full rights to it. I know Tron, Daft Punk, because I only thought of that. Rest in peace. I know. I only know that because Daft Punk just recently broke up. I know they did the soundtrack for Tron, so they got. I don't think I listened to it extensively, but you'd figure Daft Punk would be good in its own right.
I think my friend walked down the aisle, or he walked into his reception to a song from the Tron Legacy soundtrack. That's how much he likes it.
Nice. Very nice. 8 Mile, Eminem.
Oh yeah, 8 Mile is probably the best hip hop one, where it's like, because I feel like in the 90s there's a lot of great hip hop songs from soundtracks, but it's usually like one good song and then like a bunch of like leftovers.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the 90s, you just reminded me Above the Rim, because that was produced by Death Row, and Tupac is on the movie and Tupac was on part of the soundtrack. So yeah, I would say that's definitely up there in terms of artist-driven soundtracks.
I think we're missing the most obvious one, and that would be the Lion King soundtrack, where Elton John wrote all the songs.
That's right. Yes, I would say that's probably the very first soundtrack that I bought a CD because I love the first like 10 are actual songs, and then it goes into like the score, if I remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's so good that even Beyonce couldn't top it.
Sorry, Beyonce. But to tie it back to, Black Panther, I like how each song does play on a different theme and connect back to the movie. I would say it did expose me to Zakari. I didn't know who that was, and then when I listened to it, I was like, "Oh, who's this distinct voice and sound?" And then I started digging into it, and yeah, it got me to discover all these different artists, which is great. I heard a little bit of Vince Staples, didn't listen too much about it. Same thing with SOBRBE, and then I just kind of like went down like this artist rabbit hole. But that's what's great about this curation of music, because it exposes you to different artists.
I like that even though Kendrick is on almost every song, he's not credited on every song. So like sometimes it's like a nice little surprise, like, oh, Kendrick's here.
Yeah, he like pops in. He's like, hey, hello. It was Grammy nominated for Best Album, but I put on here, it did get beat out by Casey Musgrave's Golden Hour, which was actually also a fantastic album too. I'm a big Casey Musgrave.
I mean, I'm okay with it not winning Album of the Year, not because I didn't like the album, but I feel like if Kendrick's going to win for Album of the Year, it shouldn't be for a soundtrack he curated. It should be for one of his solo works.
His music. Interesting. Yeah.
Like I think To Pimp a Butterfly should have won. Like that album. I think on so many levels is very deep.
What'd you think of his Damn album?
I really liked it. All his albums have been so different, and especially since, it came after To Pimp a Butterfly, which is an album that's very much steeped in like jazz and live music, to basically an album that is kind of just like all bangers.
Yeah.
It was very interesting to hear. For some reason, I end up talking to people who have like seminary backgrounds about Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah.
So I know one guy who loves the spirituality of Kendrick's music.
Right.
So when Good Kid, Mad City came out, we were driving around LA, and he goes, "Did they just do an altar call in the middle of the album?" And I'm like, "Yep." And so he loves the spirituality of Kendrick Lamar. And then I know a guy who now runs a bar who dropped out of seminary. And he's like, Damn is great because it's like Kendrick turning his back on God. And I was like, I'm not sure that's the point of the album, but okay, that's an interesting take. And, the first album he did is very much like steeped in, it's an album that is executive produced by Dr. Dre. So he's got the Dre cosign. And it's got MC8 as a feature as well, which, it was the feature that nobody knew they needed at the time, but, he kind of crushes it. But, it's an album that I feel like is steeped in like 90s West Coast hip hop. And then To Pimp a Butterfly, I feel like is steeped in this new kind of hip hop jazz fusion that was coming out of LA at the time. So you have work with like Flying Lotus and Thundercat and Terrence Martin. A lot of the people who came out of like Low End Theory, which is like a club down here, or I don't know if it's still around, but it was this club where like people like Flying Lotus would like spin.
Wow.
So I felt like it was an embrace of like the new, was like what is considered like new LA hip hop. Or what is, on that album. And then Damn is maybe something kind of in between. He even put this soundtrack together while he was on the tour for Damn.
Yeah. I read that too. Like they had a very short timeline, I think, when they tapped him to make this album. And him and Soundwave were working on this while they were on tour. And they were just like putting together this style, the ideas together. But I think they did I think it said like 80% or like much of it was done already while on tour. And then it was just kind of putting it all together, But I think that's why I was so into it,
Yeah, and it's amazing because it doesn't sound like an extension of Damn.
Not at all. And I think the album, the soundtrack perfectly kind of resembles Wakanda, in a way where Kendrick is showcasing all these artists and pulling together these different styles and flavors. You go from South Africa to the Bay to more poppy hip hop artists, and just like Wakanda, there's different tribes, right? And so T'Challa, Kendrick is kind of like T'Challa and kind of bringing together all the different tribes. So that's definitely a parallel that I picked up between the movie and the soundtrack.
And I guess SOBRB is Killmonger.
Yeah, they represent Oakland. Yeah, the Bay Area sound, I love it, honestly. I mean, obviously from the area, so I have a personal affinity to it, but it never it never translated to the rest of the country. Only so much. Like E40, E40 is one of the few artists that was able to like
Too short, right?
Too short, like very few. But the sound in terms of like Bay Area music, it didn't. I'm not a super hip hop fan, so anyone listening probably is going to be like, "You're completely wrong. You don't know what you're talking about." But just from my perspective, you have the East Coast sound kind of influenced the rest of the country, and then obviously the Southern sound that kind of influenced the rest of the country. Yeah, the Bay Area music just never really got there. It's only rare. That's why I'm really glad to see artists like SOBRBE on this track to be put on a big stage and get for everyone to kind of hear that style of music and that influence, because you can definitely tell. I mean, it's a banger. It's upbeat, high tempo, and for the song to go platinum, and a lot of people really resonate and respond to that song, was a proud moment. Honestly, it was just like, great, a Bay Area artist is getting the proper accolade, and it's a great song.
That's probably my like go-to song if I'm just gonna listen to one song from that soundtrack.
Yeah. Have you ever? Did you read the lyrics?
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever gone through the lyrics.
Definitely
am I going to be disappointed?
No, I mean, no. It definitely raw and filtered. It definitely talks about their experiences and just their perspective, growing up in Vallejo, but also just like, growing up as young Black men and just like the environment that they were in. Yeah, it was great. Very authentic, which I really liked.
Yeah, I like how they're on the soundtrack, and Schoolboy Q, who is kind of known to have, gang affiliations or kind of to be known a gangster rapper. He's also on that soundtrack. I went to a Schoolboy Q show with my friend Jamari. So Jamari's got family in like South Central LA, and for me as a rap fan, like I kind of know like what the critics know or what's written about these people, but Jamari, like having people who have grown up like in the same neighborhoods as some of these rappers, like he has a very different take on some of these things.
Yeah.
So we go to the Schoolboy Q show, and I'd never been to a concert with him before, and the first thing he did is he walked up to the merch table, and he started yelling at Schoolboy Q's merch guy.
For what?
He said, "Why are you selling all these white kids these hats?" Because Schoolboy Q is known for the bucket hat and it says Rosecrans on the front.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh man, you're gonna get us kicked out of this show. Like we just got here. Like if you're gonna yell at the merch guy, like yell at him after Schoolboy Q goes on."
Yeah.
And the merch guy like just looks at him and just kind of hangs his head and goes, "Yeah, I know."
He's like, "Yeah, I know, but hey, they're paying for it." I mean, was it because he just saw a bunch of white kids buying all the merch and it's like, "Oh God"?
No, it's because so the hat says Rosecrans on the front, which kind of like, which is the neighborhood he grew up in. I guess that's like has like gang affiliations to it.
Oh, I see.
So you're buying this hat that has like this gang affiliation, and like if you're in the wrong part of LA, people aren't going to care.
Yeah. Oh wow. And the guy was like, whatever. We're getting, they're paying for it.
He just like he like hung his head in shame. I was like, yeah, I know. Like, probably shouldn't be doing this.
That's very funny.
Well, very cool. Thank you, Raymond, for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's fun talking about the movie, fun talking about the album, of course. Gave me an excuse to listen to it, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking about this album with someone since I started this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone's just picked a different soundtrack. So it's been like, all right, I'll save Black Panther for later. So I'm glad I got to talk about it with you.
Yeah, for sure. I'm a big Marvel cinema fan, and I was like, oh, this is a great, perfect marriage between the movie and the soundtrack, and I love both. So I'm glad you were excited to talk about it.
I'd rather talk about this than Guardians of the Galaxy as far as the music goes.
That's another. They'll say that for another time.
Because that's the other big Marvel soundtrack, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on a whole thing about how they almost intentionally try not to be memorable.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they use like kind of popular songs, like they kind of, because they don't want them to age weird. They don't want Vanilla Ice showing up in the middle of a movie and saying "Go Ninja, go Ninja, go."
Yeah. Oh man, Vanilla Ice. Yeah, that would be hilarious to see. I'd be like, what the?
Like I feel like they try to not be stuck in a certain time unless they're intentionally trying to be in a certain time. So it's like a treat when Marvel taps like Kendrick Lamar because they know it's going to be timeless music anyways.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it, Ryan.
How can people find Real Asian Podcast?
Oh yeah, definitely. So you can search us up. We're on Instagram and Facebook. Real Asian Podcast, spelled REEL. We release episodes every other Friday, and we're planning on doing Raya the Last Dragon coming up soon. Hopefully, if things work out. So yeah, find us on Instagram. Feel free to give us a follow, give us a review, and obviously follow. If you're tuning in first time to Soundtrack Your Life, give Ryan and his podcast a follow as well. Thank you, man.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us this week on Soundtrack Your Life. Make sure to visit our website, soundtrackyourlife.net, where you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate a rating. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too.